In World War II, the Germans didn't start with concentration camps right off the bat. The final solution came several years into Nazi rule. They started with things like targeting trans people, targeting disabled people. They started with things like collective punishment, targeting the many for the actions of one or a few. And the importance of that today, today's Monday, it's about 4 p.m. West Coast time. Christy Noem stood in front of a podium yesterday, and on the front of the podium it said, "One of ours, all of yours." That is a phrase directly lifted from Nazi Germany. That phrase came into being in the summer of 1942 when some guy named Reinhard something or other was killed. He was assassinated in a Czechoslovakian town. He was one of the architects of the Holocaust. And he was killed in a small town in Czechoslovakia called Lidice. And on June 9th, 1942, 117 men and boys in Lidice, almost every male in that town over the age of 10, were shot and killed. The remaining women, children, elderly people were shipped off to the camps, and they were killed there. One Nazi was killed, and Nazis responded by eradicating, killing every resident, and razing that village to the ground. It is explicitly Nazi language in context and in intent. And now the Department of Homeland Security, Christy Noem, has that language, those exact words, that exact phrase that was coined by Nazi leadership during World War II on the front of her podium. This comes days after the official Twitter account for the Department of Homeland Security posted an image with the words, "We'll have our home again." That's a song. That's a song that was very popular and was played at most Klan rallies in the first half of this century, well, last century, the 1900s. Jesus Christ, I'm old. "We'll have our home again." It was popularized with skinheads as well during the 1980s. The Klan, skinheads, Nazis, their language, their music, their songs, their lyrics, their imagery are being explicitly used and brought back into our daily vernacular by Christy Noem, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Tom Homan, and the Department of Homeland Security, while their tactics, collective punishment, are being brought back into practice by ICE and Customs and Border Patrol and that little tiny Nazi piece of shit, Greg Bovino. They're just intentionally, explicitly, and repeatedly invoking the words and imagery of Nazis in World War II, the Ku Klux Klan, and skinheads from the 1980s, white supremacists, virulent racists, bigots, misogynists, homophobes, and transphobes, and ableists. Our government is explicitly using this language and imagery, let alone the repeated posts from the Department of Homeland Security on their official Twitter account espousing the values of remigration, which means ethnic cleansing. ICE and Customs and Border Patrol are conducting an ethnic cleansing of the United States. And just in the way that Nazi Germany started with the most vulnerable people in their society, the easiest group to other. They didn't stop there. And ICE and CBP and Christy Noem and Stephen Miller are not going to stop with immigrants. They are just getting started with immigrants. Donald Trump has issued multiple executive orders and national presidential security memos, NPSM number 7, labeling as domestic terrorists, as they did with Renee Good, who was shot and killed last Wednesday by an ICE officer on a residential street in broad daylight by Jonathan Ross, the officer who filmed what he did himself and then released it, knowing that he was being filmed by dozens and dozens of other people. Undocumented immigrants are just their starting point, because undocumented immigrants is the easiest group to start with. And then we saw a follow-up memo from Pam Bondi about how the Department of Justice can implement Donald Trump's NPSM number 7 by saying, if you are against Christianity, if you are against capitalism, if you are against America, if you protest this administration, if you disagree with this administration, if you protest against this administration's immigration law enforcement and deportation tactics, then you are a domestic terrorist. So here I am. Here I am in my cabin in the mountains in January of 2026. We are 12 days into the year. ICE has already shot 8 or 10 people, killed 2 of them so far this year. And my government has labeled me a domestic terrorist because I'm an atheist, agnostic atheist. I think capitalism is killing everything in its sights for a multitude of reasons. I have a lot of problems with America right now. I am very, very much against this administration. I protest against this administration. I disagree with and protest against their immigration law enforcement tactics and their deportation tactics. And I think it's fucking gross that Donald Trump and his kids have used the office of the presidency explicitly to enrich themselves by billions and billions of dollars personally over the last year. There's nothing that this administration has done that I don't disagree with. I mean, and so now I guess I'm a domestic terrorist. And often, I find myself when I'm just like sitting out on my deck or it's late at night before I go to bed, just imagining what this country could be today if we had just elected Kamala Harris. Shit would just be normal. None of this would be happening. None of this would be happening. We wouldn't be hearing about his tariff bullshit every other day. She wouldn't be sicking the DOJ on her political enemies or on the Fed chair, Jerome Powell. We'd still have allies apart from, El Salvador. I think that's our only ally left in the Western Hemisphere is El Salvador. Unfucking real, man. Anyway.